Case will determine whether the Second Amendment is binding upon state governments as it is on the federal government. If the Supreme Court should rule the Second Amendment is not applicable to the states, what would you do as a member of Congress to secure the rights of gun owners? And we'll begin with Alan.
Well, at this time, I believe the Supreme Court will conclude that the Second Amendment is applicable to the states. One friend of the court brief was filed by two senators, Kay Bailey Hutchison and John Tester, along with U.S. Representatives Mark Souter and Mike Ross. Amazingly, the brief was signed by 58 senators and 251 representatives, and it asked the court to find in favor of McDonald, which would mean that the Second Amendment would be viewed as applying to the states. If the court found against the plaintiff, that would be McDonald, it would seem relatively easy to address the issue legislatively because of the strong congressional support. No friend of the court brief has ever had more members of Congress sign on than this particular one has. Now, whether legislation could be crafted that would stand up to a judicial review is certainly up in the air. But there is a seldom used right that has been utilized in some cases where lawyers have asked the Supreme Court to reconsider and reverse its opinion. And while some would not be aware of it, the Supreme Court has in fact reversed itself over 20 times in the past. If all else fails, as we know, the finality of the court's decision would have to be recognized. It would be the law of the land and could only be bypassed by an amendment to the Constitution. I would support such an amendment because I believe that Second Amendment rights are in fact fundamental human rights. They are tied to the rights of life and liberty, the pursuit of happiness and property. They are God-given rights, and therefore they can and should be defended. That's why the Second Amendment is so critical. Your life is sacred. You have the right to defend it. Your liberty is sacred. You have the right to defend it. Your property is sacred. You have the right to defend it. That's why the Second Amendment is absolutely critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Al. The same question to you, Frank.
I took an oath of office in December of 1969 and said that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and I take this oath of office freely and without any purpose of mental evasion. What that basically means very, very specifically is that people who have taken that oath have a solemn responsibility to the American people to support and defend the Constitution. Our oath is not to the President. Should the Supreme Court decide that this is not applicable to the states, let me read the Second Amendment to you. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. And if you're not clear about what the word state means, you merely need to go to the 10th Amendment, in which it clearly states any rights that have not been enumerated in this document that have been allocated specifically to the states belong to the people. It's inconceivable that the Supreme Court would go against that. If they do, what we need to recognize is the great seriousness with which this nation is. We need to ask for a motion to reconsider, but we also need to recognize that this is a page book that's currently being taken out of the Obama administration, exactly what Franklin Roosevelt tried to do in the 1930s. And what Roosevelt tried to do was stack the court. It is no coincidence that we've had two Supreme Court justices decide to retire so early in the Obama administration. This is a great deal of concern. You need to mobilize. We need much more than 50 people, half of whom, Alan, are, by the way, your children and grandchildren. That's right. I think they got everybody here. But when you do that, you need to recognize we need to get everyone out to get more people to recognize the level of danger that we're in. We need to sit down and recognize that we need to petition our Congresspeople to pass whatever legislation is necessary to reaffirm those rights and have that recreated as the law of the land. We cannot sit back and allow judicial activists to take control of the bench.
Thank you, Frank. Same question to you, Dave.
The Second Amendment has met the test of time, I think, consistently since 1789, and I hope that none of us ever live to see the day when an activist court somehow decides to throw it on the scrap heap of history. I am a former recipient of, I guess, Conservation Legislator of the Year by the Pennsylvania Wildlife Federation. I've earned an A from the NRA based not just on my questionnaire answers, but on my voting record. And so it ought not to be a surprise that if such a day would ever come, I would very quickly sit down with the appropriate legal scholars and the sportsman groups and say, okay, how do we undo what the court has done? But as I said in my beginning, I hope that none of us ever live to see that day.
Thank you, Dave, and the same question to you.
Yeah, there's something in the air in this country right now. It's both inspiring and a little spooky. One of my campaign events, one of the attendees said, "Josh, who's a member of the militia?" I said, "I am, and so are you. We all are." He said, "You've got my vote." We are at a period on this issue of which many of us feel so strongly that if a decision is held that goes the wrong way, it's going to force a lot of us into a very uncomfortable position, personal and professional. We're going to have to say and do things that are going to be very confrontational, antagonistic towards people who are trying to dominate us. I'm a lifelong hunter. I got my first gun when I was 6. I grew up in a farm country. Everybody had guns. If you didn't have guns where I grew up, you were a weird person. And I still believe that. If you don't have a gun, you're a weird person. And I'm an NRA member forever and ever. And this is the right, we call it the greatest right. It's the right that guarantees all rights. Because an armed population is a free population. And obviously, as Frank, both Alan and Frank read so carefully from documentation, this right obviously applies to all of us. We have a human right of self-defense. How else do you do that? You know, if you read the muster rolls from the 1700s during the Revolutionary period, individuals from the state militias were required to show up with personally owned military quality longbows. Today it would be the equivalent of an AR-15. If we don't have a right to own firearms, then how did this country ever get started? This is something I'm willing to go to the mat on. It is an absolute right. I will never back down on it. And it's something I teach my kids. And even my wife from the big city has her own concealed carry permit and her own gun. We believe in it very strongly.
We're going to go into, again, a constitutional question, perhaps a little bit more general. The next question is, have you read the United States Constitution, and how would you explain its meaning to someone who has not read it? And Francis, I see one in front of you. I think I know the first part of the question, but you go first.
Thanks. You know, it's interesting, when you have to take an oath of office to swear supporting and defending something, it's probably a good idea to read it. And one of the things that's really impressive about the U.S. Constitution, it's the shortest Constitution on earth. I don't know if everybody's aware of that. Is everybody aware that there's one spelling error? The state of Pennsylvania is misspelled. Pennsylvania in the Constitution has got one "and" instead of two. And I bring that up because if we had more of a understanding of such an important document, if we were taught, when I was in school, we had a thing was called Problems of Democracy. And what it did is it gave us an opportunity to understand the very document that gave us this hope, this opportunity, not hope as you would see that you heard bantered about in 2008, but real hope, an opportunity for us to grow, live the American dream. And that's what this document means. This is a document that gives us a basic framework under which we can live. It's something under which Americans can prosper. You have the right of self-determination. You have the right to pursue happiness. I can't guarantee you happiness. No one can. You have the right to life, which means that